Frank Williams sat at his usual table by the window in Joe's diner. The morning sun warmed his face as he sipped his black coffee. Frank was 85 years old. His dark skin had deep wrinkles that told stories of his long life. His hand shook a little when he lifted his cup, but his eyes were still sharp and clear. Every Tuesday morning for the past 15 years, Frank came to this same diner. He ordered the same breakfast: 2 eggs, toast, and coffee. The waitresses all knew him. They called him Mr. Frank and always made sure his coffee cup stayed full. "More coffee, Mr. Frank?" asked Jenny, a young waitress with a kind smile. She had only worked at the diner for 6 months, but she already knew Frank's routine. "Yes, please, Jenny," Frank said with a gentle smile. He touched the purple heart pin on his old jacket. The pin was small, but it meant a lot to Frank. He had earned it many years ago in Vietnam. Frank had been one of the first black soldiers in his unit. Those were hard days. He fought for his country, even when parts of his country didn't want to fight for him. But Frank never complained. He did his duty. He saved lives. He came home with honor. The diner was quiet this morning. A few truck drivers sat at the counter. An old couple shared pancakes in the corner. Frank liked the peace. It gave him time to think about his son, Michael, who was visiting him this week. Michael had followed in his father's footsteps and joined the army. But Michael had gone much further than Frank ever could in those earlier days. Michael was now a colonel, in charge of special soldiers who did important missions. Frank was so proud of his son that sometimes his chest hurt with the feeling. "My boy," Frank whispered to himself, looking at a small photo he kept in his wallet. The photo showed Michael in his uniform, standing tall and proud. Frank's peaceful morning changed when he heard the loud roar of motorcycles outside. The sound grew louder until it stopped right in front of the diner. Frank didn't look up. He just kept eating his eggs. The diner's door swung open hard, hitting the wall. 4 large men walked in. They wore leather vests with patches and had long beards. The biggest one led the group. He had tattoos covering both arms and wore a red bandana on his head. "Seats at the counter, boys," the big man said in a loud voice. His name was Deke Jackson. Everyone in town knew Deke and his motorcycle gang. They weren't always trouble, but they weren't always nice either. The 4 bikers sat at the counter, not far from Frank's table. They laughed and talked loudly. They made jokes that weren't very kind. Jenny looked nervous as she took their orders. Frank tried to ignore them. He focused on finishing his breakfast so he could get home. Michael was coming over later to fix Frank's leaky roof. At 85, Frank couldn't climb ladders anymore. When Frank finished eating, he carefully stood up. His old knees cracked as he rose. He picked up his plate and cup, planning to take them to the counter like he always did. Frank believed in making things easier for others when he could. As Frank walked slowly toward the counter, Deke swung his arm out to point at something. He wasn't looking where his arm went. Frank didn't see the arm in time. Deke's arm hit Frank's hand. The coffee cup fell. Hot coffee splashed onto Deke's leather vest and arm. "What the hell?" Deke shouted, jumping up from his stool. His face turned red with anger. "Look what you did, old man." Frank stepped back, surprised. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "It was an accident. I'll pay to clean your vest." Deke looked Frank up and down. His eyes stopped on the purple heart pin. Something changed in Deke's face. His anger seemed to grow bigger, not smaller. "You think being old gives you the right to be clumsy." Deke stepped closer to Frank. The diner got very quiet. Everyone watched. Frank stood straight, even though Deke was much bigger. "No, sir," Frank said calmly. "But respect gives everyone the right to an apology. I said I was sorry." Deke's friends laughed, but not in a nice way. Deke moved even closer to Frank. "Respect." Deke said the word like it tasted bad. "You want respect, old man." "Respect," Deke repeated, his voice getting louder. "You think I should respect you?" He looked at the purple heart pin on Frank's jacket again. His lips curled into an ugly smile. Frank stood his ground. Even at 85, he wasn't a man who scared easily. He had seen real danger in his life. He had faced bullets and bombs in Vietnam. He had faced hate and anger when he came home. A loud biker didn't frighten him. "I think people should respect each other," Frank said in a calm voice. "That's all." Jenny stepped between them. She was small next to Deke, but her eyes were fierce. "That's enough, Deke. Leave Mr. Frank alone." He said he was sorry about the coffee. Dake's friends watched from their seats at the counter. They seemed to enjoy the show. One of them laughed and said, "Looks like the old man has a bodyguard, Deke." Deke pushed Jenny aside, not hard enough to hurt her, but hard enough to move her out of his way. "Stay out of this, girl," he said. Frank's face darkened. "Don't push the lady," he said, his voice stronger now. "Your problem is with me." The other customers in the diner watched in silence. No one moved to help. Some looked down at their plates. Others stared with wide eyes. A few reached for their phones. "My problem," Deke said, stepping even closer to Frank, "is that you people always think you deserve special treatment." He pointed at Frank's purple heart pin. "You wear that little pin like it makes you special." Frank's old hands formed fists at his sides, but he kept them there. He had learned long ago that fighting wasn't always the answer. Words could be stronger than fists. "This pin," Frank said, touching the purple heart, "is not about being special. It's about doing your duty even when it's hard. It's about serving others even when they don't serve you back." Frank stood taller. "I wore a uniform and fought for this country when parts of it still had separate water fountains for people who looked like me." A few of the older customers nodded. They remembered those days. One old man at the counter turned on his stool to watch more closely. Deke seemed to get angrier with every word Frank said. His face turned redder. His hands opened and closed. "You think I care about your stories, old man," Deke said. "You think that makes you better than me." "No," Frank said simply. "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just think I deserve the same respect I give to others." Something in Frank's calm words pushed Deke over the edge. Maybe it was because Frank wasn't afraid. Maybe it was because some of the people in the diner were nodding at what Frank said. "Respect this," Deke snarled. And then he did it. He swung his big fist right at Frank's face. Frank saw it coming, but his old body couldn't move fast enough. Dake's fist hit Frank's cheek and eye. The force knocked the old man backward. Frank fell hard. His head hit the floor with a sound that made everyone in the diner gasp. Jenny screamed and ran to Frank. "Mr. Frank, oh my God." She knelt beside him. Frank lay still for a moment. Blood trickled from his lip. His eye was already starting to swell. But then, slowly, he tried to sit up. Deke stood over them, breathing hard. For a second, he looked surprised at what he had done. Then he laughed, a mean, hollow sound. "Not so tough now, are you?" One of Dake's friends didn't laugh. He looked worried. "Deke, man, he's an old guy. We should go." "Shut up," Deke said. He got what was coming to him. Jenny helped Frank sit up. Tears ran down her face. "Someone call an ambulance," she shouted. The old man from the counter had already pulled out his phone. "I'm calling 911 right now," he said. Then he added, "And I got that whole thing on video." Deke turned to him. "Give me that phone, old-timer, or you're next." The man put his phone behind his back. "Try it," he said. "I was a cop for 40 years." Deke seemed to think about it. Then he spat on the floor near Frank. "Whatever. He's not worth the trouble." He looked at his friends. "Let's go, boys. This place has bad coffee anyway." But Jenny wasn't just calling 911. While helping Frank with one hand, her other hand was sending a text message. The message went to the one person she knew would want to know what had just happened to Frank Williams. The message went to Frank's son, Michael. And Michael was not alone today. 10 miles away, in Frank's small house on Maple Street, 5 men sat in the living room. They were drinking coffee and telling stories. The men were all soldiers, though today they wore regular clothes instead of uniforms. Michael Williams sat in his father's old chair. At 45 years old, he looked much like his father had at that age. He was tall and strong, with the same kind eyes and straight back. But where Frank's hair was now white, Michael's was still black with just a touch of gray. The other 4 men were part of Michael's team. They had all served under him in dangerous places around the world. They had fought together, saved each other, and become closer than brothers. Dave was the biggest of the group. His arms were thick with muscle, and he had a scar that ran from his ear to his chin. But his eyes were gentle, and he laughed the loudest at jokes. Marcus was smaller but quick. He could move like a shadow when needed. He had been the team's scout, the one who went ahead to check if the path was safe. Ricky was the youngest, only 35. He had been a medic, saving lives on battlefields with steady hands and fast thinking. Even now, he carried a small first aid kit in his pocket out of habit. Omar was the quiet one. He watched and listened more than he talked. He had been the team's sniper, with eyes that could see for miles and hands that never shook. These 5 men had done secret missions all over the world. They had saved lives and protected people who would never know their names. Now they were all back home, some retired, some still serving but on leave. So then, Michael was saying, "My dad walks right up to the sergeant and says." His phone buzzed. Michael looked at the screen. It was a text from Jenny at the diner. Michael's smile disappeared as he read the message. "Mr. Frank hurt bad. Biker punched him. At Joe's diner. He needs you." Michael stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "What's wrong, Colonel?" Dave asked, seeing Michael's face. "My father's been attacked," Michael said, his voice tight with anger. "Some biker punched him at Joe's diner." The other 4 men stood up at once. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. Frank was Michael's father, but he was also someone all of them respected. Frank had come to visit them in the hospital when they were wounded. He had written them letters when they were deployed. He had cooked meals for them when they returned. "Cars outside," Omar said, already moving toward the door. "Do we need anything special?" Marcus asked, his eyes hard. Michael shook his head. "No weapons. We're not that kind of team anymore." He took a deep breath. "But we are going to handle this." The 5 men walked out to Michael's black SUV. They moved together like parts of one machine. Years of training and trust showed in how they didn't need many words. Dave got behind the wheel. Michael took the passenger seat. The others got in the back. The engine started with a roar, and they were moving. 10 minutes to the diner, Dave said as he drove fast but careful. Michael nodded. His hands were tight fists on his knees. "Tell me about Dad," he said to no one in particular. "Is he badly hurt?" Ricky leaned forward from the back seat. "If he was hit hard, he might have a concussion. At his age, even a fall can break bones. I'll check him first thing." Michael nodded. His father was strong, but he was also 85 years old. His bones were fragile. His skin bruised easily. A hard punch from a young, strong man could do serious damage. "Who would hit an old man?" Marcus asked, his voice angry. "An 85-year-old veteran. Someone who's about to have a very bad day," Omar said quietly from the back seat. The SUV sped through town. People on the sidewalk turned to look as it passed. Something about the black vehicle and the men inside made people step back. "There it is," Dave said as they turned the corner and saw Joe's diner ahead. 4 motorcycles still sat in the parking lot. The bikers had not left yet. Michael's jaw tightened. "Good," he said. "They're still here." Dave parked the SUV right in front of the diner door, blocking the motorcycles. The 5 men got out. They didn't rush. They didn't run. They moved with calm purpose, like a storm that knows it has all the time in the world to do damage. Michael looked at his team. No words were needed. They had done this many times before, entering dangerous places, facing dangerous people. But this time, it was personal. This time it was for Frank. Together, they walked toward the diner door. Inside the diner, Jenny had helped Frank to a seat. His left eye was swelling shut. Blood from his split lip had dripped onto his clean white shirt. An ice pack wrapped in a dish towel was pressed against his face. Deke and his 3 friends were still there. They had moved to a booth in the corner. They laughed loudly and drank coffee, as if nothing had happened. Deke kept looking over at Frank with a smirk on his face. The other customers stayed quiet. Some had left after the fight. Others sat still, watching Deke with scared eyes. The old ex-cop still had his phone out, keeping it ready in case Deke tried anything else. "The ambulance is coming, Mr. Frank," Jenny said softly. "And I texted Michael. He'll be here soon." Frank nodded slowly. His head hurt, and the room seemed to spin a little. He had not been hit like that since the war, many years ago. "You didn't need to bother my son," Frank said. "He's on vacation. He should be resting." Jenny shook her head. "He would want to know, Mr. Frank. You know he would." Just then, the diner door opened. A cool breeze swept in. The talking and laughing stopped. Everyone turned to look. Michael stood in the doorway. His face was calm, but his eyes were hard and cold. Behind him stood his 4 teammates, spread out like a wall. The diner became very quiet. Even Deke stopped laughing. Michael scanned the room quickly. His eyes found his father, sitting with the ice pack against his face. Something flashed in Michael's eyes. Pain, anger, love, all mixed together. He walked straight to his father. The other 4 men stayed by the door, watching everyone in the diner. Michael knelt beside Frank's chair. "Dad," he said softly. "Are you okay?" Frank tried to smile, but it hurt his lip. "I'm fine, son. Just a little misunderstanding." Michael gently took the ice pack from his father's hand. He looked at the damage to Frank's face. The military man's jaw tightened. Ricky, the team medic, came over while the others stayed by the door. He knelt down on Frank's other side. "Sir," Ricky said respectfully to Frank, "may I check your injuries?" Frank nodded. Ricky carefully felt around Frank's eye and cheekbone. He looked into Frank's eyes to check his pupils. He asked Frank to follow his finger with his eyes. "Probable concussion," Ricky said to Michael. "The cheekbone might be cracked. He needs x-rays." Michael nodded. "The ambulance is coming." He stood up and turned around. "Who did this?" Michael asked, his voice carrying through the quiet diner. No one spoke at first. Then Jenny pointed to the corner booth. "Him," she said. "The big one with the red bandana. His name is Deke." Deke tried to look tough. He sat up straighter and put his hands flat on the table. But his eyes darted to the door, where 3 large military men blocked the exit. Michael walked slowly to Dake's booth. Each step was measured and calm. He moved like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Dake's friends looked nervous. One started to slide out of the booth, but Dave, the biggest of Michael's team, shook his head slightly. The biker sat back down. Michael stopped in front of Dake's table. For a long moment, he just looked at the biker. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just looked. Deke tried to stare back, but his eyes kept shifting away. Something about Michael's calm gaze was more frightening than if he had been yelling. "What do you want, man?" Deke finally asked, trying to sound tough. "Your daddy spilled coffee on me. I taught him a lesson. It's done." Michael tilted his head slightly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. "The man you hit," Michael said, "is Command Sergeant Major Francis Williams, United States Army, retired. He served 3 tours in Vietnam. He earned the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, and the Silver Star." Michael leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. He helped integrate the 173rd Airborne Brigade. He saved 17 men in the Tet Offensive. He has been shot twice and stabbed once for this country. Michael's voice remained steady, but his eyes burned. And you decided to punch him because he accidentally spilled coffee on you. Deke swallowed hard. The diner was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. I didn't know, Deke started to say. You didn't ask. Michael cut him off. You didn't care. You saw an old black man and decided he didn't deserve respect. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. The ambulance was getting closer. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed through the diner windows. The ambulance had arrived. Michael straightened up but kept his eyes on Deke. My father will be taken care of first, he said. Then you and I will finish our talk. Dake's face had lost its smirk. He looked pale now. His friends looked even more worried. They had come for breakfast and fun. Now they sat across from a man whose eyes promised trouble. 2 paramedics came into the diner carrying medical bags. Ricky waved them over to Frank and spoke to them in medical terms. The paramedics nodded and began checking Frank's vital signs. Michael walked back to his father. He knelt down and took Frank's hand. Dad, they're going to take you to the hospital, Michael said gently. I'll be right behind you. Frank shook his head slightly. No need for all this fuss, he said. It's just a punch. Michael smiled sadly. Let the doctors check you out. For me, okay. Frank looked at his son's face and sighed. All right. For you. Then he looked at the team of military men around the diner. But don't do anything foolish, Michael. I raised you better. Michael nodded. Yes, sir, you did. He squeezed his father's hand. I just want to make sure that man understands what he did today. The paramedics brought in a stretcher. Frank tried to say he could walk, but they insisted. They carefully helped him onto the stretcher. Everyone in the diner watched as they wheeled Frank out. As they passed Dake's table, Frank looked at the biker. There was no anger in the old man's eyes. Instead, there was something like pity. That look hit Dake harder than any punch could have. After the ambulance doors closed, a police car pulled up. The sheriff, a tall woman named Rodriguez, came into the diner. She looked around and saw Michael. Colonel Williams, she said with a nod. She knew Michael from his visits to town. Jenny called us. Said your father was assaulted. Michael nodded. Yes, Sheriff. That man in the corner punched my father in the face. He pointed at Dake. The sheriff looked at Dake, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Is that right? She asked. Before Dake could answer, the old ex-cop stood up. I've got it all on video, Sheriff, he said, holding up his phone. Unprovoked assault on a senior citizen. Sheriff Rodriguez took the phone and watched the video. Her face hardened as she saw Dake punch Frank. She handed the phone back to the old man. I'll need a copy of that, she said. Then she turned to Dake. Stand up, sir. You're under arrest for assault. Dake looked at his friends, then at Michael and his team. Slowly, he stood up. This is bull, Dake said, but his voice lacked conviction. The old man started it. He spilled coffee on me. The sheriff pulled out handcuffs. Save it for the judge. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the sheriff read Dake his rights, Michael watched with a calm face. His team stayed by the door, their eyes tracking every movement in the diner. One of Dake's friends stood up. What about us? We didn't do anything. Omar, the quiet team member, spoke for the first time. You watched, he said. His voice was soft, but carried weight. You laughed while an old man bulled. The biker sat back down quickly. After the sheriff handcuffed Dake, she looked at Michael. I assume you'll be heading to the hospital now, Colonel. Michael nodded. Yes, ma'am. Right after I make sure my father's attacker is properly taken care of. The sheriff gave Michael a long look. He's in custody now, Colonel. The law will handle it from here. Michael held her gaze. For a moment, The air in the diner felt charged with tension. Everyone wondered what Michael would do. Would he accept the sheriff's words, or would he demand his own justice? Michael's team watched him closely. They would follow his lead, whatever he decided. Finally, Michael nodded. "Of course, Sheriff. We respect the law." He glanced at Dake. "My father would expect nothing less." Relief washed over Dake's face. But as the sheriff led him toward the door, Michael stepped closer and spoke just loud enough for Dake to hear. "But if you ever come near my father again," Michael said, "there won't be time for the sheriff to save you." Dake's face went white. He understood that this wasn't just a threat. It was a promise from a man who had faced real enemies and real dangers. A man who knew how to keep his promises. At the county hospital, Frank sat on an exam table. Doctors had taken x-rays of his face and head. A nurse had cleaned the cut on his lip. Now he waited for the results. Michael sat in a chair beside the exam table. His team waited in the hall. They had formed a protective circle around Frank when they arrived, clearing a path through the busy emergency room. "You didn't need to bring the whole team," Frank said. His words were a little slurred because of his swollen lip. Michael smiled slightly. "They wanted to come, Dad. They respect you." Frank looked down at his hands. They were old hands now, with spots and wrinkles, but they had once been strong enough to carry wounded men through gunfire. "I didn't handle that situation well," Frank said quietly. "I should have walked away." Michael shook his head. "No, Dad. You stood your ground with dignity. That man was wrong, not you." Frank sighed. "In my day, I would have hit him back." He flexed his fingers. "These hands aren't what they used to be." Michael put his hand on his father's shoulder. "Your hands built a better world for me, Dad. They did enough." The doctor came in with the x-ray results. She was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a serious face. "Well, Mr. Williams," she said, "you're lucky. No broken bones, but you do have a mild concussion. You'll need to rest for a few days. No driving, no reading, no screens." Frank frowned. "I was planning to fix my fence tomorrow." The doctor smiled. "Not for at least a week. You need rest." After the doctor left, Michael helped his father put on his jacket. "I'll fix your fence, Dad." "You're only here for 10 days, Frank protested. "I don't want you spending your leave doing chores." Michael smiled. 10 days is plenty of time to fix a fence and spend time with my father." As they walked out of the exam room, Frank saw Michael's team waiting. Dave, Marcus, Ricky, and Omar stood at attention when Frank appeared. They didn't salute. They were in civilian clothes, but their posture showed deep respect. "At ease, gentlemen," Frank said, falling back into his old command voice despite his injuries. The men relaxed but still watched Frank carefully. Ricky stepped forward. "How are you feeling, Command Sergeant Major?" he asked. Frank touched his swollen eye. "I've had worse, son." The team walked with Frank and Michael to the hospital exit. Nurses and other patients watched them pass. There was something special about these men, the way they moved together, the way they watched out for each other. People could feel it. Outside, a surprise waited. At least 20 old men stood in a line by Michael's SUV. Some wore VFW caps. Others wore pins or patches on their jackets. All of them stood straight, even those with canes or walkers. When Frank appeared, they all raised their hands in salute. Frank stopped walking. His good eye widened in surprise. One old man stepped forward. He wore a Korean War veteran cap. "Word travels fast. Command Sergeant Major Williams," he said. "We heard what happened at the diner." Frank slowly returned the salute. His hand trembled slightly. The old veteran continued. "We want you to know that in this town, we take care of our own." Another veteran stepped forward. He walked with a limp and had a Vietnam service ribbon on his jacket. "My son is the district attorney," he said. "That biker won't get off easy. I promise you that." A third man joined them. He was younger, maybe 60, with a Desert Storm cap. "And I own the garage where those bikers get their motorcycles fixed," he added. "They won't be welcome there anymore." Frank looked at all the men. His eyes filled with tears. For most of his life, he had fought for respect, for a place to belong. He had served a country that didn't always serve him back. But here, now, these men, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, stood together for him. "Thank you," Frank said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you, brothers." Michael watched with pride. His father had never talked much about the hard times, about the discrimination he had faced as a black soldier in a time of segregation. But Michael knew. He had seen old photos, heard stories from other veterans. Now, seeing these men honor his father, Michael understood something important. His father hadn't just fought in a war. He had fought to change minds, to break barriers, to make a path for others, including his own son, to follow. As the veterans surrounded Frank, shaking his hand and patting his back, Michael saw his father stand taller, his injuries seemingly hurting less in the warmth of this brotherhood. This, Michael thought, is what real respect looks like. The next morning, Frank sat in his living room recliner with a cup of tea. His face still hurt. The bruise around his eye had turned dark purple, but he felt better than he had any right to after being punched by a man half his age. Michael and his team had stayed the night. They had turned Frank's small house into a temporary military base. Dave and Omar slept in the guest room. Marcus took the couch. Ricky set up a cot in the dining room. Michael slept in his old childhood bedroom. Now the men moved around the house with purpose. Dave and Marcus were outside fixing the fence that Frank had been worried about. Omar was on the porch, keeping watch while pretending to read a book. Ricky was in the kitchen making breakfast for everyone. Michael came into the living room with the local newspaper. "You made the front page, Dad," he said, handing the paper to Frank. Frank put on his reading glasses and looked at the headline, "Local Hero Assaulted. Community Rallies Around Vietnam Veteran." Below was a photo of Frank from his military days, standing proud in his uniform. Next to it was a newer picture of Frank surrounded by the veterans who had met him at the hospital. "I'm no hero," Frank said, folding the paper. "I just did my job like everyone else." Michael sat down across from his father. "You did more than your job, Dad. You know that." Frank looked out the window. He could see Dave and Marcus working on the fence, laughing as they hammered new boards into place. "Your team," Frank said. "They're good men." Michael nodded. "The best. They'd follow me anywhere." "Like you followed me," Frank said quietly. Michael smiled. "I had a good example." The doorbell rang. Omar checked through the window, then opened the door. Jenny from the diner stood there holding a large box. "Good morning," she said, a bit nervous with all the military men around. "I brought Mr. Frank some food from the diner. And these." She held up the box. Omar let her in. Jenny walked to the living room and set the box on the coffee table. "The whole town is talking about what happened," she said. "People have been dropping these off at the diner for you." Frank opened the box. Inside were cards, letters, and small gifts. He picked up one card. It was handmade with a child's drawing of a soldier on the front. "Dear Mr. Frank," Frank read aloud. "My grandpa says you are a hero. I'm sorry the bad man hurt you. I want to be brave like you when I grow up. Your friend, Tyler, age 8. Frank's hand trembled as he set the card down. "I don't understand all this," he said. "Why now? I've lived in this town for 20 years. Jenny sat on the edge of the couch. "People always respected you, Mr. Frank. But some things you have to see to understand." She looked down at her hands. "When that man hit you, and you still kept your dignity, it showed everyone what real strength is." The phone rang. Michael answered it. He talked for a minute, then turned to Frank. "That was Sheriff Rodriguez," Michael said. "Dake is being charged with assault on an elderly person and a hate crime. The district attorney is pushing for the maximum sentence." Frank frowned. "A hate crime?" Michael nodded. The sheriff said there's evidence he targeted you because of your race. They found texts on his phone. And the video from the diner caught what he said to you. Frank sighed. That won't help him change. That's not your problem, Dad, Michael said. He made his choice. Ricky called from the kitchen. Breakfast is ready. The men gathered around Frank's small dining room table. There were pancakes, eggs, bacon, and fresh coffee. Before they started eating, Michael stood up. I'd like to say something, he said. The other men grew quiet. Yesterday, my father was disrespected and assaulted, but he showed the same courage he's shown his whole life, the same dignity. Michael raised his coffee mug. To Command Sergeant Major Francis Williams, my father, my hero. To Frank, the other men said together, raising their mugs. Frank looked around the table at these strong men who respected him, at his son who had followed in his footsteps but gone even further. Thank you, boys, he said simply, but his eyes said much more. After breakfast, more visitors came. The mayor stopped by to check on Frank. Then came the pastor from the local church. Then 3 more veterans. Each brought something: food, flowers, offers of help. By afternoon, Frank's living room was full of gifts and cards. But the most valuable thing was what he saw in people's eyes when they looked at him. Not pity, but deep respect. 1 week passed. Frank's bruises had faded from dark purple to a yellowish green. He could open his eye fully again. The doctor had given him permission to resume normal activities, though Michael still watched him closely. It was Sunday morning. The town had organized a special event at the Veterans Memorial Park. Frank hadn't wanted to go at first, but Michael had convinced him. It's not just for you, Dad, Michael had said. It's for everyone. People need to show what kind of community they want to be. So now Frank sat in a folding chair on a small stage in the park. He wore his old dress uniform. It was a bit loose on him now. He had lost weight over the years. But the medals on his chest still shone brightly in the morning sun. Michael sat beside him, also in his full dress uniform. The sight of father and son in their military uniforms, side by side, made many people take photos. Nearly half the town had come. They filled the chairs set up on the grass and stood in groups around the edges of the park. Children played on the playground nearby, their laughter floating through the air. Mayor Thompson stepped up to the microphone. She was a short woman with gray hair and a strong voice. Good morning, everyone, she said. We are here today to honor one of our own. Command Sergeant Major Francis Williams. The crowd applauded. Frank looked down at his hands, uncomfortable with the attention. Many of you have known Frank for years, the mayor continued. You've seen him at the diner, at the hardware store, at church, but perhaps you didn't know his story. Today, we want to recognize not just the unfortunate event of last week, but the lifetime of service that preceded it. The mayor went on to talk about Frank's military record, about his 3 tours in Vietnam, about the lives he had saved, about the barriers he had broken as a black soldier in a time of segregation. As she spoke, Frank thought about those days, about the friends he had lost, about the times he had been denied service at restaurants while wearing his country's uniform, about the slow, hard progress toward equality that he had been part of. After the mayor finished, a group of elementary school students came forward. They had made a large thank you card for Frank. Each child had drawn a picture and written a message. The card was so big that 4 children had to hold it together. Thank you for your service, Mr. Frank, they said in unison. Frank felt tears in his eyes. He blinked them away and smiled at the children. Next, the commander of the local VFW post presented Frank with a special plaque honoring his service. Then the high school band played a medley of patriotic songs. Finally, it was Michael's turn to speak. He stood tall at the microphone, his uniform crisp and perfect. My father never talks much about his service, Michael began. He never brags about his medals or the lives he saved. When I was growing up, he taught me that true courage isn't about fighting. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Michael looked at Frank. Last week, a man struck my father because he thought an elderly black veteran didn't deserve respect. He was wrong. My father has earned respect not just through his military service, but through the life he's lived every day since. Michael's voice grew stronger. I followed my father into the army because I saw how he carried himself, with dignity, with honor, with compassion, even for those who showed him none. The crowd was silent, listening intently. What happened last week was terrible, Michael continued. But what happened afterward shows the true character of this community. You stood up. You showed what you value. You sent a message that in this town, we honor those who serve. We respect our elders. We reject hate. Michael turned to his father. Dad, you once carried wounded men through gunfire. You once faced discrimination without losing your humanity. Last week, you showed that same courage again. You are the strongest man I know. The crowd rose to their feet, applauding loudly. Frank stood up slowly and walked to the microphone. The applause continued for a long time before it finally quieted enough for him to speak. Frank looked out at the faces of his neighbors, people he had lived alongside for 20 years. People who were seeing him, truly seeing him, perhaps for the first time. Thank you, he said simply. But I'm not the only veteran here today. I'm not the only one who served. Could all veterans please stand? Throughout the crowd, men and women of all ages stood. Some wore uniforms. Some wore caps or pins identifying their branch or war. Some needed help to stand. But they all rose, one by one. These are your heroes, Frank said, gesturing to the standing veterans. Not just me, all of us. The crowd applauded again, even louder than before. 2 days after the ceremony, Michael sat with his father on the front porch swing. It was early evening. The air was cool and pleasant. The stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Michael was leaving tomorrow. His leave was ending. He needed to return to his base. His team had already gone, heading to their own homes and families, but not before fixing everything they could find around Frank's house. The fence looks good, Frank said, looking out at the neat white fence surrounding his yard. Too good, maybe. Now I need to repaint the house to match. Michael smiled. Just another project for my next visit. They rocked gently in the swing. The creaking sound was familiar and comforting. Frank had built this swing when Michael was just a boy. I got a call today, Frank said after a while. From Sheriff Rodriguez. Michael turned to his father. About Dake. Frank nodded. He's agreed to a plea deal. 18 months in prison, plus anger management classes and community service when he gets out. Michael frowned. Seems light. Maybe, Frank said. But he also wrote me a letter. From his shirt pocket, Frank pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Michael. Michael opened the letter and read it silently. It was written in rough, uneven handwriting. He apologizes, Michael said, surprised. Says he's ashamed. Says he never thought about what veterans like you went through. Frank nodded. People can change, son. Sometimes they just need a push in the right direction. Michael handed the letter back, still not convinced. Do you think he means it? Frank shrugged. I don't know, but I hope so. He folded the letter and put it back in his pocket. His community service will be at the VA hospital. Maybe spending time with veterans will teach him something. They were quiet again for a while, just rocking and watching the night grow darker. You're a better man than me, Dad, Michael finally said. I wanted to hurt him for what he did to you. Frank put his hand on his son's shoulder. No, Michael, you're the better man. You could have hurt him. You had every reason to. But you let the law handle it. You showed restraint. That's real strength. From inside the house, the phone rang. Frank started to get up, but Michael gently pushed him back down. I'll get it, Michael said. He went inside, and Frank could hear his voice answering the phone. A few minutes later, Michael came back out. He had a strange look on his face. Who was it? Frank asked. Mayor Thompson, Michael said, sitting back down. She has a proposal for you. Frank raised his eyebrows. What kind of proposal? The middle school has been looking for someone to talk to students about Veterans Day next month, Michael explained. The mayor suggested you. Frank shook his head. I'm not a public speaker. You did fine yesterday, Michael pointed out. That was different, Frank said. Besides, what would I talk about? Michael looked at his father. About service. About dignity. About standing up for what's right. He smiled. The things you taught me. Frank looked out at his neighborhood. Lights were coming on in the houses across the street. People were coming home from work, starting dinner, living their normal lives. A week ago, Frank had been just another old man in a small town. Someone people greeted politely but didn't really see. Now suddenly, they wanted him to speak to children about his life. I'll think about it, Frank said finally. Michael nodded. That's all anyone can ask. As they rocked on the swing, a car drove by slowly. The driver honked and waved. Frank waved back. Who was that? Michael asked. No idea, Frank said with a small laugh. People keep doing that now. The next morning, Michael loaded his bag into his car. It was time to go. Frank stood on the porch, straight and tall despite his age. Michael hugged his father carefully. I'll be back for Christmas, he promised. I'll be here, Frank said, and I'll have a list of projects ready. They both laughed. Then Michael grew serious. Dad, I'm proud to be your son. I always have been. Frank's eyes grew misty. And I'm proud of the man you've become. As Michael drove away, Frank stood on the porch and watched until the car disappeared around the corner. Then he went inside and picked up the phone. He dialed the mayor's number. Mayor Thompson, this is Frank Williams. About that Veterans Day talk at the middle school. I think I'd like to do it. After hanging up, Frank went to his bedroom closet. In the back, in an old shoebox, were his medals, photos, and letters from his time in the service. He had kept them hidden away for years, not wanting to dwell on the past. Now he took out the box and set it on the kitchen table. These were stories that needed to be told, not for his sake, but for the children who would listen, for the community that had finally seen him, and for Deke, who might one day understand the true meaning of respect. Frank opened the box and began to sort through his memories, preparing to share them at last.